Hey guys, it's Nicole, and I just wanted to give a bit of background as to what this workshop is about and why I'm creating this video. These slides were actually created for a previous company that I was interning at, but I never got to run the workshop, and I'm thinking that I might just send this link to them if they still want to learn more about collaborating with UI UX designers. But otherwise, I thought this would be a really useful piece of information to put on Nomademy. If you are someone who's looking to work with a UI UX designer, be it a freelancer, or maybe you're new to hiring a UI UX designer, whatever it may be, I think this will be a really useful workshop or presentation to help you understand more about UI UX and hopefully how to work with designers. So without further ado, let's begin the presentation. I'm going to stay in this view just so you can see me in that little circle at the bottom left corner, because once I enter slideshow mode, you won't be able to see me. So let's just keep it a bit interactive like this. So welcome to this workshop on collaborating with UI UX designers. My name is Nicole and I run Nomademy, basically an academy for creatives who want to go from Fiverr to five-figure or who want to start their digital nomad journey. And I also run Waves, which is a design studio. Let's begin by starting with some pre-reading. Like I mentioned, this was originally a workshop, so I assigned these two articles, which I thought were really interesting, and I'll include the link in the description bar below. Feel free to read in your own time. But for this workshop, the objective is to foster a better understanding and collaboration between startup teams and UI UX designers. This is what I'll be going through in this workshop. So first things first, why is UI UX design important? When you come up with a product, how do you even figure out what features to prioritize or deprioritize? That's where a lot of UX research becomes very useful and very vital in developing the MVP, which is so important in any startup. Because in the UX research process, that's where user interviews happen. That's when you really talk to your target audience to find out what it is that they really want, to understand and empathize, and to figure out what the problems really are, what the pain points are, so that your solution is actually addressing the problem. That is basically UX research, which is why UX is so important. And UX design is actually really important to secure funding as well. When it comes to funding, investors really want to know if your solution is validated by the market. And a part of that validation process, I believe, is very much to do with the UI UX researcher or designer talking to people and to figure out if whatever you're designing or whatever you're developing is actually addressing the problem. So that's why UI UX design is so important. Also, when you have a really good UI UX designer, you avoid costly redesign and project failures. Because imagine this, you omit hiring a UI UX designer and you just kind of come up with the design and the prototype on your own. You hand over the rough sketches to the developers and then they create something that doesn't even make sense because everything is so modularized and nothing flows. The information architecture isn't there. It's not intuitive. That's when you have to do a lot of back work and revisions and reiterations that just slows down the development process and pushes back the launch date. So one way to avoid this is to hire a UI UX designer who can make sure that everything flows smoothly, such that when you hand over the prototype to the developers, it is seamless, it makes sense, and everything flows and everything is intuitive and the user experience is good. So that's why it's really important to have UI UX. Also, some outcomes from having good UI UX would be increased conversion rates, decreased bounce rates, reduced customer support costs, as well as increased quality of leads and customers. Because when you have a good design, I think a lot of the benefits also come in the brand appeal and just the overall user experience. So how design impacts product adoption, customer satisfaction, and brand perception, as I mentioned a bit previously. A lot of startups or people in the tech world or companies that are a bit more traditional, I think for designers, a huge part of the process in selling our services has always been trying to make them see the benefit and the ROI of design, but sometimes that can be a bit hard to quantify. But one way to really reach out and speak to the business owners is to let them see that ROI. So you need to start using some of the languages and the terms that they use. So things like product adoption, customer satisfaction, and brand perception are things that you can really touch on. And as business owners, this is how designers can help you in your business. So for product adoption, one thing that UI UX designers can do is to create really good design that actually guides users, reduces friction, which in turn increases product adoption rates. For customer satisfaction, I think it's a no-brainer. When something is pleasant, easy to use, I think this fosters a lot of positive emotional experiences, which ultimately increases customer satisfaction and loyalty. And as well as brand perception, when things are consistent and visually appealing, overall it just increases the brand value. And you may be wondering, how do UI UX designers actually build consistency. While in most cases, there'll be a brand designer, or maybe you already have a brand guide. However, you want to make sure that the website or mobile application or digital product, whatever the UI UX designer is working on, you want to make sure that that digital product is also cohesive and matches the brand guidelines. You don't want to be creating something completely different such that it confuses the users. So that's where a good UI UX designer can come in as well, to make sure that everything is consistent such that your whole brand speaks the same language. For emotional connection, thoughtful use of color psychology, imagery, and typography is also something that designers can do. And all this ultimately gives you a competitive advantage. And design can really be something that helps you stand out from the crowd. Now I want to talk a bit about design. There's an art of balancing aesthetics and functionality and usability in design. So these are some snapshots which I took from Dribbble, and I don't mean to shame any of these agencies or designers. I think they do a lot of amazing work. Like, look at how visually appealing these are. But can I ask you, how do you think you're supposed to interact with some of these screens? Am I the only one that's confused? I hope not. Maybe I'm the only one, but I personally find these screens very visually appealing. However, not very usable because I don't know where my eye is supposed to go, and I don't know what the call to action is. This is where design is so broad, and UI UX design is very different from graphic design, where UI UX design focuses quite a bit on functionality and usability. That's why we're not just called UI designers, where we only care about the visuals. We're called UI UX designers because UX, the user research and understanding industry trends and standards, is so important in our process. So now I want to talk a bit about demystifying the design process, because you might be wondering, how on earth do designers even come up with their design in the first place? Do they just look at Dribbble? Do they just look at different references? But no, we have a very systematic strategy in which we come up with designs. You may have heard of the design thinking process, which is really a classic and iconic framework which helps us really go through the different steps and methodologies towards coming up with a prototype. But there are many different frameworks which can be used. For example, the hook model, as well as the lean UX cycle. But I would say the design thinking process is really the basic and really the fundamentals and the essence of what we do. But another very popular model is the double diamond framework. This is a snapshot of what it is. So first things first, we look at the problem, and then we have a discovery process where we're trying to gather as much information as we can regarding the problem. So there are a lot of methodologies at this point in time. We do user research, we do interviews, we do a bunch of things like user journey mapping, sitemaps, competitor analysis, a lot of different methodologies. And then once we have all that information, we kind of narrow the scope and focus on what the key issue is. So that's why you see the diamond kind of narrowing again before it converges into defining the problem. So once you do all your research, you define what the problem really is, and then you see the diamond kind of expand again because you're thinking and ideating different solutions to target that problem. So you can get really creative here. But of course, once you finalize on a really good solution, or what you believe is the most feasible, viable solution, then that's when the scope kind of narrows again before you start really honing in and designing that solution. So this is basically the design process for a lot of UI UX designers. So let's say you kind of decide on the design with the UI UX designer already. You guys are communicating back and forth the feedback, the suggestions, and you're trying to understand the designer's thought processes as well. This is where I'm going to give some tips on how you can better bring across your feedback to designers, because sometimes it's quite hard for us designers to really understand what the clients want, and we really want to do a good job and we don't want to waste time. So these are just some tips. First is to be specific and objective. Clearly articulate your feedback, focusing on specific elements of the design. There's this classic joke saying that clients will say, oh, I just want the design to pop. But what does that really mean? So in this tip, it's really just pointing out how helpful it would be if you can point out specific elements of the design which you want to point out and be changed. The second tip is to balance criticism with positivity. I think as creatives, we are such sensitive individuals who really take ownership and really care about our work. So if you're able to point out things that you like in the design along with the things that you want to criticize about the design, I think that would be very, very helpful. It's also very encouraging, especially if you're going to be working with this UI UX designer long term. Being able to point out the strengths of the designer is going to go a really long way. Another thing which designers love to do, and we take a lot of pride in as well, is the creative freedom and the creative process. So definitely give the designer enough creative freedom, but also don't hold back on ideas which you think are going to be very, very helpful as well. Fifth is to use visual annotations or examples. Sixth, consider user-centric feedback. UI UX designers care about the user's needs and wants, and sometimes I hear of designers arguing back to the point, but is it what the user wants? Does it really solve? Being able to come back to these core questions whenever you do give feedback is going to be really helpful in the process as a whole, such that everyone really creates a product that is very useful to the end users. And lastly, foster iterative feedback loops. Design is an iterative process, so being able to keep a constant open channel of discussion between the designer and the business owner or project manager, whoever is in charge, being able to keep that line open such that conversations and feedback can happen quickly is going to really help in the design process as well. Now I'm going to be talking about common misconceptions. This one's pretty fun. The first myth is designers work in isolation. This might feel like the case sometimes, but the reality is that designers thrive in collaborative environments and actively seek input from stakeholders. As a designer myself, I really enjoy that buzz of discussions when I hear from the different people about what their ideas are, what their perceived solutions and their emotions are. I think being able to hear all the pieces of the puzzle really does help in the design process. The second myth is design is subjective and based on personal preferences, but the reality is that designers incorporate user research, industry best practices, and data-driven insights into their work. And the third myth is that designers only focus on the visual interface. As I mentioned, this is false because design encompasses both the visual interface as well as the overall user experience. So UI UX designers really care about both of these things. Now I'll be talking about design tools and resources. So on the left, we have design tools. This is personally what I've used in the past, and I still use, for example, Figma, especially if you're a UI UX designer. Design resources. Pexels is really great for stock-free images, and Google Analytics is actually something that bigger companies use because numbers speak for themselves. So if you have that data, there's a lot you can gather and design based on that data. And for design inspiration, there's Dribble, but I personally like Behance because normally projects on Behance just showcase a full case study, which is always really helpful. So this is the point in the presentation where you can comment what your biggest takeaway was. And thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions or if you would like to collaborate, you can reach out to me at hello@nomademy.com. Alternatively, you can reach out to me at hello@waves.design, which is my design studio. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!